In the last video, we looked at the Loudmax. In this video, we're going to look at a tool that a lot of people are very intimidated by, but that's really phenomenal, especially if you need to just pump gain into something in a pretty transparent way. And that is the limiter number 6. So for my money, this is actually and it's free, so that's lucky. But in terms of all the options that are out there, this is one that I actually really prefer over some of the commercial products, things that are $100, $200. This one does the job and gives you a lot of variety. So we're going to try to walk through this plugin a little bit and just give you some ideas of what it's capable of, because what we're listening for and comparing all of these is the character. So the one downside to the Loudmax for this genre of music, for this context, is how you can really hear the release. You can really hear it pump. And for some styles, that works great. For others, like this, it kind of sticks out. And so you're hesitant to really drive it in too hard because of the result of that and how aggressive it was on that last hit. Now with this guy, and specifically here with our final stage, this is what you can call the sonic maximizer here all the way to the right. And I'm just going to switch this over to ISP Protect so we can see the metering that's going on. This is our final kind of maximization stage. And this is determining like the final, you shall not pass sort of indicator. So 0.2 is the brick wall, and whenever it goes past that, that is when it is limiting. So let's put this in digital mode first and start to drive into this. And because this is red, and because you'll see a red box around this, you would think that that means that the sound is getting degraded in a really audible way. But just listen to what happens. Right? Especially with that last hit, just how much more transparent is that? It's a night and day difference. The one area it does struggle is with the initial transient on the snare drum. On those first two snare drums, you'll kind of hear it pop, and not really in a flattering way. And if we're going to drive this all the way in, we'll actually almost be able to match our reference level, but that artifact will come out a little bit more. So you probably heard a little bit of the crackling there. That being said, if this was 2010, 2009, maybe even a little bit earlier than that, people would have loved this. It would have actually worked. There's some music out there where for whatever reason they used maximizers, and I don't know when this was first made available, but there were some maximizers being used that really gave off very audible distortion when they were pushed too hard. And this doesn't even do it that much. I mean, that's what's so amazing about this. It's blinking red. Everything that you're doing here seems wrong. We're not even seeing gain reduction on this meter because we're using the digital mode, right? We're not even actually going into any of these ISP protects. And if I go and I change the oversampling to 4 times, it might even eliminate some of those distortion crackles a little bit. So let's try that. So only there at the beginning is it really giving us any serious amount of trouble. And I can actually even make this work sound even more clean by going into these ISP protect modes. And you might be wondering, like, okay, there's so many other features and modules in here. Why are you just sticking to this one? Well, that's because this is where you get the transparent loudness. These other modules in here are very much character driven, and I'll talk more about that as we move forward. This is very transparent. So we have an ISP fast and ISP precise mode. Let's start with ISP fast, bring this back to 0 and see if we can come to something that we like. I'm going to go to 12 dB since I know we're going to be going beyond 3 dB. It's encouraging you to not drive things too crazy, but hey, What's the fun in that? We're going to really push things over the top here. And I'm going to start driving this in. It's amazing how clean this still sounds. Let's go all the way up just so you can hear it. You can tell now, actually, in this mode, you start to audibly hear the aggressiveness. And that's because, in my opinion, the signal coming in is probably a little bit too dynamic to be limited this aggressively. And so you probably wouldn't push it this hard, right? We'll go to a setting that sounds right. But first, let's try all the way to the max. Right, so with the precise, I actually do, I think in this case, prefer fast mode. I think on precise, it actually does, it's as precise as it says. It clamps down so hard that there's no way for it not to be a little bit more audible. But let's go to a setting that we kind of like here and just kind of go by taste. Maybe go harder. Yeah, I like the way it actually handles that last one. That's when it gets the most aggressive, but it's not that noticeable as compared to when it's pushed in too hard. Okay, so this would probably be a pretty nice setting. Let's listen to it on the precise and just see what difference. We'll play it first on fast. Actually, let's go through the three different ones. Let's start with digital, go to fast, go to precise, and just listen for the differences. And as a music producer, this is what you're trying to do, right? You're trying to find what fits the song, what fits the context the best. So what's interesting about that is they are three very distinct sounds. And I think don't get discouraged, for example, if you don't prefer what I prefer. And that's because we're different and we're listening to different things, and that's okay. There's no right or wrong answer here. If it was me, I'd almost prefer probably ISP fast, but I also like the way the digital one sounds, even if it is causing some kind of artifacting. Right? There's no right or wrong answer here. It might give me some problems if I try to go and submit this to iTunes, but then again, maybe not. It's still clamping down here at -0.2. It's showing me that I'm in an okay range there. So this is the one that's responsible for the sheer loudness, that final output. But we also have in here things like a clipper. So the difference between the clipper and something like this final maximization stage is that the clipper is going to have more character. You're really going to kind of hear it, and you kind of want to hear it. That's the point. So we have a threshold here now at -0.3 instead of -0.2, and that's because you're designed to use a lot of these guys together, kind of like how we had the two loud maxes and we had those different threshold values. One was like at -1, the other was at -0.2. It's the same kind of idea in here. I could go and I could put this to like -1 and use it there and then go for extra gain here. But in this particular case, in this particular context, I'd probably want to just go with whatever the cleanest option is and not even use the clipper. But just so you can listen to it, we're going to use the clipper as if we were using this final output stage here. And this will probably still get some use, but if I go to -0.2 here and -0.2 here, it really shouldn't. So let's go in here and kind of mess around with this guy, add gain, adjust the knee, and so forth, turn it on. We have the option between normal, mid-side, and multi-band. You can experiment with that. I think I'm just going to stick to normal, mainly because I feel okay with those other balances, mid-side balance, multi-band, in terms of what's going on. But again, personal taste sort of thing. So this actually is working. It's sounding pretty good. We have the upsampling on this 4 times gain reduction. That seems to be what's working best. It's not making anything too audible. We could, in theory, if we brought this threshold down, really start to hear the characteristic of this. So I'll try that so you can hear it. It's not probably going to sound very good, but you can do it. You can hear how aggressive it is with the distortion constant when we have that knee all the way down. It's kind of gain reducing at all times, similar to what we see with the knees in the compressor, right? It's just going to start kicking in sooner. And notice what it also is doing to the RMS. All right, that's probably the key with the clipper, is how much more it reduces that RMS. That has to do with the distortion. So when we put these two in combination with one another, we should be able to see something very similar to our reference. So I'll try to set that up, and I'll try to keep it as clean as possible. Always easier said than done. So we've now arguably achieved a louder result than the reference. Is it appropriate to do this? Probably not, but it shows that it is possible and that it still doesn't sound all that bad. And I think that's kind of the modern miracle with a lot of these tools. And some people listening to this are probably grabbing themselves and convulsing on the floor because of just how ridiculous and how aggressive this is. But I'm just showing you that it is possible, and that if you like the way it sounds, you know, who am I to judge you? Who's anybody to judge you, right? It's your music. You can do whatever you want to it. So that's how you'd work with the clipper, and the clipper can then really be the thing that can drive that RMS, especially with these knee values and kind of driving into it aggressively. It's certainly possible to get some very interesting results. We have a peak limiter in here, and this peak limiter, if we move over to the left, is very similar to what we just saw with the Loud Max before, in that you should expect to kind of hear the character of the processor itself. You should kind of hear that release. So when we get to that final cymbal hit, it should be kind of aggressive, and you'll really hear it kind of clamp down on that. So we'll leave the threshold here at 0.3, and we'll start to drive into this. We have some different modes. We have like a soft mode, which is not going to be as brick wall-y. It's going to let some of the signal still come through, which is not what I want. Obviously, it will be caught over here by the ISP protection. So we're good And we can even kind of compensate by turning the output down here as it's coming out of that. But still, I'm going to go with the brick wall because I think for this particular genre, this is what I would normally do. And because I want it to catch that initial transient, I want it to pull down on that. All right, so let's go ahead and start to mess around with this guy. We have a couple of different modes for the speed of the release. We can keep it fast, keep it kind of loud and proud and punchy, or we can slow it down, in which case you'd expect it to be a little bit more transparent because it's never, or it will, but it won't come back to zero as quickly, but it will lose some of that edge. And this then depends on the style of music. If you're doing something aggressive like this, you want the fast time because it will be aggressive. It's like a pop song. You want to even out the level. I'd, probably mostly stick with this guy, but you could slow this down and it would have a similar effect. We also have these different modes here. And I'm not going to go over what each of these does. You can read about it, but really it is about using your ear. And I know which one I usually tend to prefer. So I'll pull back on this and we'll see if you agree with me. All right, let's put it into 12 mode, dB of gain reduction. So you can see that we're on the right setting here on peak. And let's start to drive in. So I'm sure you're hearing how this sounds quite similar to what we just had with the Loud Max, especially on that last cymbal crash there. So you can hear how that ends up making a little more transparent. I tend to prefer type A, at least for this particular song, but always go through and kind of try those out and see what you like. And again, I think in this example, I'm not sure if I'd even really necessarily use the peak limiter. We can try to put it just to mode on as compared to linked and see what that does. This basically means that the left and right channels are going to operate independently for the limiting, which can be useful. I kind of like them linked. I like the continuity of that, but this can get you some interesting results. So I kind of like the way that sounds with a setting like that. And then we could obviously go in and try to get a little bit more gain coming through here at the final stage. So we also have a high frequency limiter. It is what it sounds like. It's going to focus specifically on the high frequencies, and that's what it's going to be limiting. In a track like this, it might be useful because of the cymbal crashes and that being really the thing that's driving all of the gain reduction here. If we just focus in on that, perhaps then we can get something better out of our final loudness stage here. So we can experiment with that. This one really is going to have to be done in conjunction with the other. So let's take a listen. right? So I'm not even hearing the greatest difference in the world, probably because my ears are fatigued at this point. But for me, I could get away with probably just using this final protection. Now, there's also a compressor in here, and I don't think we're going to look at the compressor because we've spent so much time and because it's not going to really make a difference in this track. It is worth mentioning, though, and maybe we will just use it here quickly, that this is not a compressor that's really going to be able to clamp down on peaks for you. It's meant to be more of a punchy compressor to let some of that transient through, or by default, it's set to 1 second before it even kicks in. So that's letting almost everything through if you think about it. And the reason you'd have something like this, and there's actually a couple of reasons, so I'll talk about those and hopefully then you can apply this, is first of all, if your track comes in and it is very lifeless already in terms of dynamic, which this track is not. By no means is this track already coming in here overly squashed. But if it was, we could come in here and we could actually set this up almost to something a little bit, here it's considered a faster time, but for how it would work, it would almost be slower because you really would start to then hear the transient popping through. Right? You can hear that punch coming through even at basically the fastest time. That's because this is a very slow compressor. Now, what you could do alternatively is flip the signal flow on this and say, okay, we're going to go limiter into compressor. And if we go limiter into compressor, then what it means is if the limiter squashes all of the life out of this, we could try to add a little bit back in with the compressor before that final stage here at the end. So it's basically just flipping these two guys around. And there would be reasons in times to do that. So this isn't just like a wasted feature in here by any stretch of the imagination. For this track, the compressor wouldn't want to use it, I don't think. I don't think it needs any more compression coming in. I think it's punchy enough already, but just a personal opinion there. So this is a very long video, but it goes to show just how much is possible and how much is out there. And you don't have to be intimidated by this plugin. I know a lot of people are, but you don't have to be. You can even just stick with what you have going on over here, and that's usually more than enough. So we saw with this plugin that it is possible for us to match our reference track, albeit very aggressively, but it is possible, and something that you can mess around with. It all comes down to your personal taste, and I never want to tell you to do or not to do something. It's up to you to make those decisions on your own. These are the concepts. Now go out and do something with it.